This episode of The History Guy brought to you by the online strategy game Call of War. Admiral William F. Halsey once wrote that the history of the Pacific War can never be written without telling the story of USS O'Bannon. The Fletcher-class destroyer was awarded an astounding 17 battle stars for service during the Second World War, many of those for the brutal naval battles surrounding the Solomon Islands campaign. There, the USS O'Bannon and her crew engaged in exploits that are almost beyond belief, including a point-blank slugfest between a destroyer and a Japanese battleship, and sinking a Japanese submarine with the help, so the story goes, of potatoes. The exploits of the United States Navy's most decorated destroyer of the Second World War during the Solomon Islands campaign deserves to be remembered. The Solomon Islands campaign was one of the most brutal of the Pacific War, both on land and at sea. And you can reenact the strategies of that war in the online player versus player strategy game, Call of War. In Call of War, you can choose a real country to lead during World War II and fight up to 100 other players in real-time games that take up to weeks to complete. You can use many units, even secret weapons, tanks, planes, even nuclear bombs, build your own strategy, and take over the world. You can forge alliances with other players and declare war on your neighbors. I really enjoy the way the gameplay allows long-term strategy to play out, requiring all of your skill in a player versus player scenario. And you can play on the same account for both PC and mobile. Click on the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. The offer is available only for 30 days, so act fast, and I'll see you on the battlefield. USS O'Bannon was laid down on the 31st of March, 1941 at Maine's Bath Iron Works. O'Bannon was a Fletcher-class destroyer, considered a highly successful class. At 175 vessels, the largest destroyer class ever built for the United States Navy. Although the class was named after USS Fletcher, O'Bannon and her sister USS Nicholas were the first two ships of the class to be laid down, and the first two to be commissioned. 376 foot 6 inches long with a beam of 39 foot 8 inches and a draft of 17 foot 9 inches, the Fletcher class was designed for range and speed, intended as a match for the large destroyers of the Japanese Navy. They carried 5 5-inch 38 caliber guns in single mounts and 10 21-inch torpedo tubes in 2 centerline quintuple deck mounts. Named after Marine Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon, a hero of the First Barbary War, USS O'Bannon was commissioned on the 26th of June, 1942, barely more than a month before the U.S. would go on the offensive in the battle to retake the Solomon Islands. O'Bannon arrived in the South Pacific in September. On board was First Lieutenant Lyndall Knight, a native of Limerick, Maine. He had joined the Navy while attending Bowdoin College, and after graduation in 1941 had trained as an intelligence officer. After Pearl Harbor, he sought a post on a combat vessel, requesting a vessel from his home state of Maine. He was assigned to the USS O'Bannon while it was still under construction. The first major Allied land engagement against the Japanese Empire was the invasion of the islands of Tulagi and Guadalcanal in the southern Solomon Islands chain, with initial landings occurring on August 7th. The U.S. Navy History and Heritage Command writes, for over a year, the Navy, stretched thin to cover its worldwide commitments at a period when new ships were just beginning to join the fleet in any number, was to fight and fight again in the Solomons in one of the most bitterly contested campaigns of history, wresting air and sea control from the Japanese and providing the Marine Corps and the Army with every possible support as they gained ground inch by inch on the myriad islands. O'Bannon played a valiant part in these endeavors. The goal of the Guadalcanal Campaign was initially to prevent Japanese forces from using the island as an airbase to interdict Allied supply lines, as the Allies had discovered that the Japanese were building an airstrip on the island. The Allies could also use the airfield themselves as part of an effort to capture the significant Japanese base of Rabaul on New Britain Island. As such, much of the struggle in the campaign was over the airfield. With the Japanese defenders initially caught off guard, U.S. Marines had taken the unfinished field quickly during the invasion in August. The Marines named the field Henderson Field, after Marine Corps Major Lofton Henderson, a pilot who had been killed in the Battle of Midway the previous June. As the original U.S. code name for Guadalcanal had been Cactus, the planes operating from Henderson Field were called the Cactus Air Force, and they played a major role in the battle to hold the island. O'Bannon's first combat mission was in early October, to escort the escort carrier USS Copiahe as it delivered aircraft to replace Cactus Air Force losses. Between October 23rd and 26th, the Japanese 17th Army conducted a major offensive to retake the field, but were repulsed with heavy losses in what became called the Battle for Henderson Field. Still, the fight was not over, as the Japanese planned another major offensive. A substantial Japanese fleet was sent to bombard the field and marine positions, and to defend a landing force of nearly 7,000 troops, 2 Japanese divisions to reinforce the Japanese troops on the island, and finally drive the American Marines into the sea. Having become aware of the Japanese plan to make another assault, the Allies had landed their own reinforcements and supplies, defended by a U.S. Navy task force under the command of Rear Admiral Richard Turner. When Allied aircraft spotted Japanese ships, Turner sent his available combat ships to intercept them. The U.S. fleet, Task Group 67.4, consisting of 2 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, and 8 destroyers, including USS O'Bannon, under the command of Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan, was outgunned by the Japanese fleet, under the command of Vice Admiral Hiroki Abe, which included 2 battleships, a light cruiser, and 11 destroyers. But Callahan's fleet was the only force the Allies had available to protect the vital Henderson Field from bombardment. The 2 fleets met in early morning hours of Friday, November 13th, 1942. The first naval battle of Guadalcanal was a desperate and confused struggle in a pitch-black night that Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch Parker, commander of the destroyer USS Cushing, called just like a barroom brawl with the lights out. The battle became a confused action. Naval historian James Hornfisher wrote in his 2011 book on the battle entitled Neptune's Inferno. What followed was a melee, Colosseum style, with the lights out and a heavy fog blown over the fighting arena. Naval historian Samuel Eliot Morrison wrote that the Japanese and American ships mingled like minnows in a bucket. O'Bannon was following in line behind the destroyers Cushing and Sterett as they nearly stumbled at point-blank range upon the Japanese battleship Hiei. It was a dangerous position, Hornfisher writes. The range to their big target was about 1,200 yards, too close to miss, but also too close for torpedoes to arm themselves en route. Hornfisher notes, a destroyer's life expectancy within hailing distance of a battleship is short. Laffey and Sterett poured fire from their 5-inch guns into the battleship at knife-fighting range. Both paid the price. Laffey was sunk, Sterett heavily damaged and ablaze. O'Bannon radioman Ernest A. Herr recalled, "We are now leading the column and have had to maneuver violently to avoid hitting the lead destroyers and have missed a collision with the Sterett by a scant 30 feet. Knight recalled, the executive officer, I could hear his commands, emergency back, emergency full, to keep from running into and colliding with other ships. But now it was O'Bannon's turn to slug it out with the 728-foot 4-inch, 360,000 long-ton heavily armored battleship Hiei. The Portland, Maine Press Herald wrote in 2014, it was David versus Goliath. The O'Bannon, a Maine-made destroyer from Bath Iron Works with a crew of 275, was dwarfed by the Hiei, the Japanese admiral's flagship. The O'Bannon's 5-inch diameter guns were no match for the Japanese battleship's 14-inch guns. Knight told the Press Herald, every time the gun fired, the turret door would blow open, and I could see star shells, ships blowing up, and it became a melee. Knight said I could hear the gunnery officer exclaiming that this was murder, his spraying the Japanese pagoda, the Hiei superstructure, up and down, until it turned cherry red. Hornfisher wrote that burning particles from the Hiei fell on O'Bannon's upper decks. The extreme close range offered an advantage, the Press Herald writes. However, the smaller and more maneuverable O'Bannon was able to get close to the Hiei and rake it with fire. So close, in fact, that Hiei couldn't shift its cannons low enough to hit the O'Bannon. Its massive shells screamed harmlessly overhead. When the supreme moment came, Hornfisher writes, the O'Bannon led the way, attacking a ship 12 times her size at point-blank range, damaging her and disordering her commander's ability to fight. Abe, his flagship heavily damaged and having no idea of the size of the force facing him, withdrew. The U.S. losses were terrible. In a battle that lasted less than an hour, the Navy lost 6 ships and 1,500 lives. 2 admirals, Callahan, who had been aboard the badly damaged USS San Francisco, and Rear Admiral Norman Scott aboard USS Atlanta, were killed, the only U.S. admirals of the war to die in a surface engagement. The Japanese had also taken serious losses, with 2 of their destroyers sunk and the Hiei so badly damaged that she was unable to escape destruction by the U.S. aircraft the next day. So many ships from both sides were lost in that area where the battle was fought that it became known as Iron Bottom Sound. But O'Bannon, despite its David versus Goliath attack, received only slight damage from a shell likely fired not by the Japanese, but USS San Francisco. Her crew survived the battle without a single injury. The result was significant. Hornfisher writes, Admiral Callahan's spectacular sacrifice that night saved Henderson Field from a huge Japanese bombardment from the sea. When Guadalcanal's only airfield was saved, its pilots were able to fly the next morning and sank a whole division of troop transports, drowning their soldiers and ending the threat posed by Japanese forces to Guadalcanal. While the first naval battle of Guadalcanal might have represented O'Bannon's trial by fire, another event the following April received more press attention. In the early morning of April 5th, 1943, the O'Bannon, still in the area of the Solomon Islands, made a radar contact that, her explains, turned out to be a large Japanese submarine. The submarine, the type Kaichu-type submarine RO-34, was apparently unaware of the destroyer, and the destroyer charged, intent on ramming the submarine. But the skipper, Lieutenant Commander Donald MacDonald, concluded at the last moment that the submarine might be a mine-laying type. Her writes, "Not wanting to blow up ourselves along with the sub, the decision was made that ramming was not a wise move. At the last moment, the rudder was swung hard to avoid a collision, and we found ourselves in a rather embarrassing situation as we sailed alongside the Japanese submarine." Then came what can only be described as one of the oddest sea tales of the war. Her explains, "Our ship, however, was far too close to permit our guns lowered enough to fire, and since no one on deck carried a gun, not a shot was heard. Ditto on the Japanese sub. No one there had a gun either. In this situation, no one seemed sure of the proper course of action, and it probably would not have been covered in the manual anyway. Thereafter, everyone just stared, more or less spellbound. The submarine was equipped with a 3-inch deck gun, and the sub's captain finally decided that now was probably a good time to make use of it. As the Japanese sailors ran towards their gun, our deck parties reached into storage bins that were located nearby, picked out some potatoes, and threw them at the sailors on the deck of the sub. A potato battle ensued. Apparently, the Japanese sailors thought the potatoes were hand grenades. As the O'Bannon was able to pull away to bring her guns to bear, she fired on the submarine as it submerged. She then ran over and dropped depth charges. MacDonald reported the submarine sunk. When the Association of Potato Growers of Maine heard of this strange episode, her writes, they sent a plaque to commemorate the event. The plaque was mounted in an appropriate place near the crew's mess hall for the crew to see. Well, it was the crew's battle. The potato story is repeated in several books and publications and occasionally pops up on websites today. Last year, the military website SOFREP ran a story with the headline, USS O'Bannon, taking slugs at Japanese subs with dud spuds and out for blood. But did the Maine potato episode really occur? MacDonald's action report doesn't mention potatoes at all. Rather, the website We Are the Mighty explains, Commander MacDonald later said that the submarine was so close that the ship's cook bet another crew member that he could hit it with a potato, but maintains that no potatoes were actually thrown at the enemy. Once the media got hold of the story, he contends, the story became a legend. The story has been generally discounted, but not by everyone. For example, Nathan Lipford, curator of the Maine Maritime Museum, told the Associated Press in 1984, it's too weird a story to have been made up. And recall, her, a crewman on the vessel, reported the story firsthand. He's not the only crewman to recall the event. The U.S. Naval Institute Press noted in 2005. The skipper did not know that Seaman First Class Ambrose Harden was on deck hurling a few spuds, as he told his son 100 times through the years. Bud Moreau, a gunner on the port side of the O'Bannon, also recalled some folks throwing potatoes. George Starkey on the searchlight platform amidships saw others on deck and remembered that they were throwing things, though he could not say with certainty that they were potatoes. Thus, the Spud War might have occurred without MacDonald's notice, the Naval Institute Press continues. Most likely, no one in the crew ran to the skipper later to boast of throwing away valuable food and spare parts. For the exacting naval historian who must rely on physical evidence, none exists, the press writes. But for those historians who could admit eyewitness testimony once in a while, it is there. Although the press admits, given that their closest range during the attack was 90 yards, as stated in the action report, only the best arms in the crew could have hurled spuds that far. And despite the ongoing controversy over the veracity of the potato throwing, one part of the story is truly fiction. While MacDonald cited an oil slick and claimed to have sunk the submarine, in fact, they had not. As the website combinedfleet.com notes, RO-34 was again sighted on the surface the next day, this time by the destroyer USS Strong, which scored at least 3 sure hits with her main battery before dropping depth charges as the submarine submerged, with debris proving that this time RO-34 had finally been destroyed. But for all the press the potato story has gotten over the years, USS O'Bannon doesn't need an old sea story to cement her fame. USS O'Bannon was awarded 17 battle stars. Those are awards for meritorious participation in battles over the course of the Second World War, and a Presidential Unit Citation. She was the most decorated United States destroyer of the Second World War. In all that combat, and despite a collision with the destroyer USS Chevalier in 1943, the O'Bannon never took a single casualty. Not one Purple Heart awarded to a member of her crew, earning her the nickname Lucky O. O'Bannon went on to earn 3 more battle stars in the Korean War and 2 in Vietnam. In 1966, she was part of the recovery team for the Gemini 11 spacecraft. In January of 1970, after 28 years of service, USS O'Bannon was decommissioned and stricken from the rolls. Admiral Halsey said of her, "Time after time, the O'Bannon and her gallant little sisters were called upon to turn back the enemy. They never disappointed me." Call of War is an exciting free online strategy game set during the dramatic events of the Second World War. You can choose your strategy, engage in epic battles, and take over the world. For the next 30 days, you can claim your exclusive gift of 13,000 gold and 1 month free premium subscription by clicking on the link in the description. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.